I'd like to introduce Ben from True Classic, and we're going to hear a truly classic story. And then Jim and I are going to sit down and have a little bit of a chat as well.
Let's do it. So I lost my voice. I'll try to give you my best talk without a voice. So bear with me there. Okay, perfect. So great to meet everybody. First thing first, let's just do a quick trivia game. I have 3 questions for the audience. The first is, how many companies are out there in the world? Any guesses? More. More than 200 million? Less than a billion? 330 billion or so. Now, second question is, what % of those companies ever break 9 figures or $100 million? Less. Less than 0.1. 0.004%, so small number. Raise your hand if you know of a brand that was able to bootstrap a company, no external funding, break 9 figures in 2 short years, and do so profitably. Who is that? I got some store credit for you right after that. So we've been able to do that. We've been able to grow incredibly fast, incredibly far, and do so profitably without any external funding. And while today I want to focus more on the international expansion story, I want to kind of like bring you on this journey and then think about how international is playing a role in it. So if you think about our brand back in the day, we were founded in the summer of 2019 with a pretty basic mission of saying, let's reinvent the t-shirt. Let's offer the most amazingly fitting, highest quality t-shirt ever created and offer it to men for a really great price point. It's a commoditized space. You may have laughed at me saying, like, are you seriously going to try to reinvent the t-shirt in 2019? And I would say yes. And the product market fit was just crazy. So we started in the US with a website with one core product of the best t-shirt in the world. And ever since then, we've been on a very crazy growth journey across 3 key dimensions. The first is the product, the second is the channel, and the third is the market, which I'm going to dive in deeper today. So product, we moved from True Classic Tees to True Classic and said if we figured it out for the t-shirt, there's a lot more that we can offer for guys. And I like to say that the purpose of our company is to make people look good and feel good. We're not really selling apparel, even though we sell premium apparel for guys. We're selling confidence. We're selling this good feeling, self-esteem. And so we said if we can make a shirt that makes guys look great and feel great, what else can we make? So we launched a bunch of categories: activewear, chinos, jeans, jackets, underwear, socks, etc. We're either doing it, if you think about any product category, we're either doing it or are planning to drop it pretty soon. Second is the channel. So we started with a website on Shopify and said, where else do people like to shop? So we launched on an app, and then Facebook and Instagram shops, and then on Amazon, and then open our own 5 retail locations, and then on marketplaces. And third is market, which is what we're all here to talk about today. Started in the US and currently in 190 markets worldwide. And the idea was the problems we're solving are not US specific, right? We got a great product market fit with the US consumer, but we believe that the opportunity is much more global than that. And if you just do basic math, in our category, the global total addressable market is 4 times as large as the US. So just from wherever we want to kind of like play, we figured we have to go international, and we have to do it pretty fast. So we are a very scrappy company. We're a startup. We believe that done is better than perfect, and we move fast over anything else. And so first thing first, we figured we don't have the time to build this massive team and hire for all the functions and figure it all out. We need a partner. So we did some research. We found out about Global E, and we partnered with them. And the idea was, in my opinion, international is all about localization. And what we mapped out is essentially all the areas we can localize the business by, call it the dimensions of localizations, things like payment methods and currencies and creative and the language of the website, right, and so on and so forth. And then the degrees of localization from kind of like low, medium, and high. And so if you think about something like pricing or currency, you can say lowest hanging fruit, offer it in the local payment methods that people like to pay, offer it in the local currency because people are really afraid about the idea of USD and what it means for them in the local currency, right? That's relatively low hanging fruit. Then you can go deeper and say like, how can I optimize my pricing in the local market, thinking about who's in my competitive set, thinking, kind of like taking everything into account when it comes to our costs as a brand, right? Whether it's shipping and duties and returns and so on. And you can kind of go on and on. And we were like, first thing first, let's just take care of all the lowest hanging fruits. Let's make ourselves available. We didn't localize pretty much anything aside from offering it in the local currencies and the local payment methods. We also didn't localize fulfillment. We still shipped internationally from a single distribution center. And the product market fit was just insane. Overnight, international became 20-30% of our business, and we've been up and to the right ever since then. And then we've been on a very long journey of localization. So first thing first, went and hired our general manager, hired him from Bombas, phenomenal guy named Adam, and he's our leader. Before we had a leader, we just launched with a partner. So just to give you a sense of like how scrappily we like to move. So first we had the business, then we hired the leader, and I said, okay, let's figure this out. And so now what we're doing is, or actually I should say where we started on the, for example, creative front, is saying whatever we do in the US, let's just see where we can get traction really quickly. So instead of being kind of like bogged down by, let's get it all right, let's have all the different languages, and let's do all the research on the customer, make sure that we are positioning ourselves correctly to speak to their motivators or counteract their barriers, right? We were like, let's just go with whatever works best in the US. I know earlier we discussed here Meta and Google. We focus on Meta. I used to work in Meta, but it's not because of that. It's because Meta is truly an unbelievable engine to have your brand discovered worldwide, and it's the easiest to turn on. And so what I would recommend is kind of being anybody's focus of trying to run ad globally. We do run on Google too, but Meta is definitely the growth engine there. And then we just turn it on in basically made ourselves available and then turn ourselves on and started running ads globally, seeing where traction might come into fruition, right? So I know they mentioned earlier here the concept of ROAS. We live by ROAS. We actually live by a metric called contribution margin ROAS. So instead of just looking at revenue, we try to digest the entire P&L and really take it down to what is our ultimate contribution margin after we account for everything. Payment and processing fees, product COGS, shipping, fulfillment, expected returns, and the costs associated, expected exchanges and the costs associated. Mind you, we didn't have even reverse logistics put together, right? Right now, if you're an international customer and you're not happy with your order, we tell you, go ahead, just donate it. We don't even have a place for you to ship it. It's cost prohibitive for us to get the goods back. And so we were just like, let's go fast. And then we started seeing where we can get traction. So we didn't localize any of the creative. We just ran it English for now. Took the best creative possible that we have from the US, what we know, which is a big assumption because, as you can imagine, the way we speak, we are a pretty authentic, kind of like funny, edgy brand. If any of you, actually, quick show of hands, who of you have ever heard about True Classic before? Kind of curious. Okay, good size actually. So, our tone of voice probably could offend a bunch of people internationally, but we didn't have time to figure this out. So we were like, let's just go with what we know. It's funny and edgy and see what we learn. And naturally, as you can imagine, the easier success for a brand like ours is in the big English countries, right? So you start seeing immediate traction with Canada, with the UK, with Australia. Then you start having other tiers of countries. Germany was mentioned. It's big for us. Mexico, Israel, a bunch of other countries. And then there's the long tail. And then you start doing analysis and figuring out, okay, where am I profitable? And I'm not just talking about attributed ROAS. I'm talking about reality business, what goes in, what comes out. How much revenue? How much are we spending? What is the lowest hanging fruit? Just killing a bunch of markets that make no sense. Not because they can't make sense, but because it's not easy enough to turn them on, right? So for us, countries that actually have a pretty big GDP, like Japan, right, require a much bigger effort localizing everything, whether it's like the creative, providing Asian fitting, showing photography of Asian models, obviously the translations, offering customer support in Japanese, right, and so on and so forth. So the juice wasn't worth the squeeze. And then we started saying, as the next step, let's start localizing and see what can be done. So we partnered with a translation agency to work on the website, but we didn't wait on that. We just started basically taking those creatives that we saw doing really well and trying to layer in essentially translations, but dubbing, not even like reshooting the whole creative asset. And we started seeing phenomenal reductions in CPAs or increase in ROAS in key markets like Germany, for example, which would make sense. But then in other markets like Australia, where even if just you kind of put the Australian dialect, you start seeing how you all of a sudden start resonating with people, right? And then you start going down this list. So for example, fulfillment is a big one for us, right? As you can imagine, we're not currently priced the most competitively in a lot of those markets. It takes a long time to ship our goods from North America all the way, let's say, to in Australia or in the UK. And it's also very expensive. So it's slow and expensive, which means you're losing people in the funnel. So now we're trying to figure out how quickly can we set up distribution centers and where? And how do we optimize our entire operations, taking into account the country of origins and the goods and where are they going? So from like a duties and taxes perspective, how do I optimize that? Figuring out sensitivities around the local customers. How much are they willing to wait, right, on an order of clothes for a guy, right? What would happen if I can shorten it to them? So sometimes we will go all in and just set up the distribution center, but for us, we just try to MVP everything. So we will do something scrappy like offering essentially expedited shipping incognito and saying what happens if we were to get it to them in 2 days? What happens to CVR? What happens to AOV? Is it meaningful, right? Serving our customers and actually understanding, is there a need? And when is the need arising? So for a business like ours, we have a lot of gifters. We have a lot of females who actually buy for their significant others. And if you think about it, when you gift, you typically tend to be more time sensitive than, let's say, if you buy for yourself and you might not need that. We don't sell like, anything that you need urgently. So you might have more, let's put it this way, tolerance towards a longer ship time or transit time until you get the goods. And so we've been on this journey. This journey is definitely not done. It's actually pretty dang exciting. And what I was really hoping in this kind of like initial 15 minutes or so of the talk is to tell you a little bit more about what we've been able to do, our international journey and general journey, and then kind of like open it for a conversation to see what might be interesting for you guys as you're thinking about scaling your brands, or as you're thinking about, being potentially concerned about certain barriers, because international is this big beast, right? It might be scary to pursue or might be viewed by some as a distraction.
Yeah, so you come in the morning, you hear one story, and then you come in the afternoon, you hear, no, forget what they said in the morning. Be scrappy, go after it, blast them, and go. I mean, it was really interesting as we were talking to the different speakers, because, what we wanted to underscore was, just like they said earlier, every market's different, and every company is different as well. In fact, I thought Alex did a really good job on our prep call for the first one, trying to say different companies have different goals. Are you trying to exit early? Are you trying to build a long-term brand? Are you trying to X, Y, Z? So you guys kind of started out of the gate, and it was like, let's just make this happen. Was there any kind of impediments along those? Like, whoa, slow down, guys. Was there anybody that didn't get invited to the first Christmas party because they were not pushed forward ahead? Any kind of dynamics you could share from the early days of the big push?
Yeah, it's interesting. We are just, this is like our DNA, right? If I'm thinking about the but the company values we have established. Number one is move the needle. And for us, it's about growth, profitability, and valuation or exit. And so that matters over anything else. No matter what you do, what's the purpose? Are you trying to drive top line? Are you trying to drive profitability? Are you trying to drive something for the brand that's going to make it more appealing to an investor from a valuation perspective? And then you start going and saying, what are the kind of values to drive this idea of moving the needle?
Right.
First thing for us is go fast. Mm-hmm. Second is execute like a pro. Third is be creative. Fourth is live with empathy. And so if you think about going fast, going back to this idea of done is better than perfect, I see it all the time, right? Like we are very anti-corporate culturally. We have zero red tape. We don't jump through hoops. We have no board, we are bootstrapped. We have no board of directors to report to or investors or any of this nonsense. We're all about business and we're all about execution. And that's why we were able to grow so fast, right? Because we just broke through all those barriers. So if you talk about kind of like these dynamics, there's many voices in the room who are very risk averse. But I would always go and challenge and say, well, what's the worst case scenario? You try it internationally and you flat. All right, so backtrack. Start in all those countries, see where you can get traction, kill it, move on, right? And so that's kind of like the mentality. And if you think about our early days before we even started internationally, the inspiration was two things. One, the idea of TAM and the fact that we're playing in a very, not small, but like a fifth of the global market in the US. And second is, you started seeing it, a lot of just organic traffic hitting the site from all sorts of regions, just on GA. And you're like, well, curious to see if we will be able to kind of like sell to all those people. Why don't we make ourselves available at least? And so that's kind of like where the idea was born. And from an investment perspective, it's really the risk if you work with a partner, because really the only variable cost that you're assuming is this advertising piece,
right.
Which if you know how to work the advertising machine, it's not that risky because you're in full control. So I would never say, hey, let's go all in, build distribution centers, put all the inventory in 50 locations and make, like park all our cash all over the world. I would say, let's just start super scrappily and see where we can get traction to go back and kind of like accelerate the growth. And then you learn where the opportunity is. And again, a lot of brands are stuck in this like analysis paralysis, and they just start with like how risky and complicated and it can be, instead of kind of like seizing the opportunity and really being, again, moving fast and scrappy.
Yeah, it reminds me, the speaker we had from Loot Crate, which, he's moved on, they've moved on. But yeah, he was just saying in Europe, it was the Facebook machine. You put $1 in, $6 came out, and you just cranked it and you cranked it. And that drove a lot of their early growth. And again, I haven't been doing good about pulling questions in from the crowd and things like that. So this is an opportunity to kind of ask your questions, challenge the assumptions, anything like that. So feel free to jump into it. But did you feel like it was the fact that you guys had some kind of people that had come out of the ad industry that you were a little bit more comfortable with some of that? Because you made a pretty compelling point that you guys were breaking even on ad spend sometimes, just barely breaking even, but a little bit profitable on it. What are some of the pros and cons about kind of how you do that fast growth that's highly dependent on mostly Google and Meta?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think that it really starts with just true understanding of your financials and unit economics and P&L, right? And your cohort analysis, and where is your true break even and what you expect down the line. What I've seen a lot with brands is that they don't truly understand it. No matter, even like sometimes really late in the game, they don't go deep enough to understand for every dollar that goes out, what actually comes in. And then you may have a CFO in the room who, again, like you mentioned it earlier, like really, not unintentionally, but like with a lack of understanding of how marketing actually works, might suffocate, like basically like the potential kind of like growth. So I think two things happen right now. One is creative, two is analytics, if I'm thinking about this world of growth marketing. On the analytics side, it's all about measurement, and it's all about understanding your P&L and understanding your cohort analysis and retention curves. And even if you decide, because you always have control, right? The idea is as you push spend, you become less efficient. Mm-hmm. And so it's always this balancing act of like, well, how much should I push? Because I want to grow, but I also want to be remaining profitable. And if I push too hard, I may be kind of like acquiring customers at a deficit. And then how quickly am I going to be paid back?
Right.
Depending on kind of those retention cohorts, right? So it's this balancing act operating a brand these days between essentially revenue, profit, and cash. It's kind of like the three key aspects that you manage every single day. So you do all this analytics as a business, then you go back into the analytics on your marketing. And if you're doing paid marketing at a high level, you need to leverage a lot of different tools, an MMM and an MTA. Let me not use acronyms, a marketing mix model, a multi-touch attribution model, a post-purchase survey where you ask people like, how did you first hear about us? Or what drove you to the site today? Your on-platform reporting, your Google Analytics reporting, right? Some gut feelings on like, okay, I pushed here and I'm feeling the business numbers following through. So it's this like massive triangulation. Leaf studies with incrementality, right? The idea of like holding a group and not serving them ads and then having another group that does see the ads. And can you actually create this causal relationship and prove to yourself that this is worth it? And when you do, then you know kind of like how far can I push on any given market. It doesn't, this is by the way, a framework, right? So that can be applicable to the US, internationally, whatever it is that you're doing. And then creatively, which is essentially, like to me, like analytics is this strategy. It's a direction. Tells you like how far you can push, where should you go. Like you follow the numbers, you follow the data if you believe in data-driven decisions. Creative is the execution, right? It's ultimately, we all like to say, we call those like customers, users, visitors, all sorts of names. It's people. It's people. You're selling to people. And the thing about people is that they don't care about anything that you care about. They don't care how fast your brand grows. They don't care whether you're hitting your financial targets. They care about solving their own emotional needs and problems, and that's it. And so that goes back to the creative part. It's not about, which colors do I want to pull together and how do I make it pretty. It's about, do I truly, truly understand the psychological makeup of that human being on the other side, and how do I engage with them? How do I become memorable? How do I really convince them that I'm going to solve their problem? Maybe I even make them aware that they even had a problem in the first place, right? And that's a lot of the creative piece. Now, the better you do on creative, the more beautiful your analytics start looking, right? And so it's this ongoing piece. And again, creative can be in the ads, creative can be on your website, on your landing pages, and so on and so forth. So those are kind of like the big levers, I would say. Mm-hmm. And then with that, you can just have the confidence of pushing on the gas. Now, a brand like ours, again, we didn't have any external funding. And we are growing super fast, which is very hard to do, right? Usually people will raise a lot of money to fuel the growth, right? So it really forces us to be really disciplined and really understand our kind of like profitability and what drives it, so we can kind of like try to do those two things together, essentially. And so international presents a really big opportunity. I remember even thinking through, what happens in the US with all this like evolution of the industry with like privacy, iOS 14, things like that. You think about international, and for example, even on iOS alone, it just has a lower penetration, right? Us North Americans are like Apple junkies, but Android is dominant in all over the world pretty much, right? WhatsApp is dominant all over the world. We are on iMessage and Messenger. And so you have all those things, and then competitively, like we talked about, everybody is after the US wallet, because it's just an unbelievable economy of consumers. But then there's all those other pockets internationally where people might just not be focusing on them. So it might leave you with an advantage if you know what you're doing, if you will, and do it well in a somewhat less competitive environment. And competitive is, for me, always like the ad auctions, right? Because that's ultimately where you generate customers. So if you have this global mindset and you kind of like, it just gives you another lever of distribution, if you will, to go and figure out like, well, which markets is reacting to me? And I don't even think it's static. Like 1 week, certain markets might pop, other weeks, maybe others. Has a lot to do with, again, with localization. Do you understand the local shopping moments, where to hit them, what messaging, when do they shop, all that stuff. And so you need to be really flexible at enabling that, kind of like casting a really wide net and capturing people wherever they may be.
Right. All right, well, if there are not any questions, okay, we've got one.
Thanks very much. I like the scrappiness, it's really good. How do you find localization, right? So what are the 3 tips you do to stay scrappy but also drive success? Because localization is normally where people slow down, right? That paralysis where they spend loads of time assessing what to do and trying to work out local cultures. How do you shortcut that process?
100%. So I mentioned how we started not localized almost at all. So everything we do, we look at impact effort, pretty much. What's the impact, what's the effort? And kind of like impact divided by effort is how we prioritize, in a nutshell. So if you think about that, when you work with someone like a Globally or an ESW or whoever, you can very quickly, out of the gate, enable all the payment methods because they already aggregated it. So you don't need to go and cut the deals with Klarna and with Afterpay and with every single one. I don't know, I hear in Latam, like, cash upon delivery is a big thing, and like all sorts of things like that, right? You just have it by default. Currencies, right? Pretty simple because they deal with a lot of the foreign exchange rates. Creative is complicated because now you're like, well, there's not even just languages, there's dialects, right? What I do in Mexico might not work Spanish-wise to the US Hispanic, to the Spanish person in Spain or anywhere else, right? And so what I like to think is, well, how can we do this scrappily? So one approach I'll give as a tidbit is influencers. Because when you engage with influencers, it's localized by default. I don't need to train an influencer to speak the native anything. I just know that they are local. And so when an influencer, and we see a lot of success with it in the US, right? User-generated content and things of that nature. So when an influencer speaks the language and presents it in a certain way, I already know that it's probably going to be a lot more trustworthy than this American brand who doesn't really get it, right? And so, but as I mentioned, like on the metric, just think about it as like list to yourself all the dimensions of localizations. And I threw a bunch, like pricing, currencies, methods of payment, creative, website, landing pages. Just think about literally everything down to like, if you're a brand like ours, like fitting, sizing, right? Like even like down to seasonality. Do I offer long sleeve in the winter months? Or, like it just keeps going. But you just think about like, well, what can I localize theoretically? And then literally make yourself like low, mid, high levels of localization, right? And then don't slow down because you're not localized. Just realize that I have not had a time to localize Japan. Therefore, my product market fit is only at a certain place, and now I can make the decision of like, can I make this profitably? Is it worth it, or should I put it on the side burner? I can be still available organically. I don't need to invest until I'm ready to really tackle the market and then go really big and say, well, if I want to hit it in Japan, that's what I believe that needs to be done. But again, start with like as broad of a net as possible to see where you can get traction already. That's a missed opportunity if you don't do that already, while you kind of like keep that open mind of, it's not that Japan is not working, it's that we have not done the work that needed to be done to make Japan work. And kind of like really have this inward thing. By the way, not just with markets, but in everything in life. I see a lot of with marketers like, TikTok isn't working, Meta isn't working. No, you guys are not working. You have to take it inside and think, how do I make this channel work, right? Like, what is it? And like realize that maybe you don't have the resources or the time or the knowledge to make it happen. But like that's typically kind of like my high level recos.
There's something I heard that was like, maybe it's not hard to reach audiences, maybe you're a hard to access brand. And I think you're right.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, considering your voice was gone, your voice was loud and clear. So thank you, Ben. This was a great story. So I'm going to ask Jim to kind of bring up the next panel, but I want to thank you. And again, hopefully you can stick around and share some wisdom, and really appreciate the time today.
Of course.
All right. Thanks, guys.